Alright guys, this is a demonstration of the diesel power source Turbonator. It's pretty easy to use. Select your turbocharger, Turbonator, select what map sensor you have, exhaust pressure sensor, select your vehicle so you can get the correct engine speed, turbine sensor, it's not used on Turbonator. Control logic, there's actually two different variations of control logic. The first one's a static ratio. What this is saying is you'll have from 1.3 to 1, so every 1 pound of boost you'll have 1.3 pounds of exhaust pressure, essentially from idle to wide open. The second one is a dynamic one. So what this is saying is 0 psi, which is your idle, you want a 2.5 to 1, which is impossible. All that's doing is it's holding the exhaust pressure a little bit higher when you first take off in order to build pressure. And then you have at 2 psi, it drops down. It's a linear transition from 2.5 to 1.7, and it sees roughly like 6 decimal places, so it sees quite a bit of data. And it goes all the way down to 0. So what it's saying at 0 all the way at the bottom, on the bottom right of the target ratio, is at 40 psi, you want to have a 0 to 1 drive pressure ratio. So 0 pounds of exhaust for 40 pounds of boost, which obviously is not possible, but that's used to act as a wastegate. Turbine speed, not turbine speed, but exhaust brake control. So what this is saying is that engine speed disengage, roughly 200 RPMs higher than my idle. If my RPMs drop below 950, it turns off the brake. That's all that's saying. And then when my brake does engage, it's going to regulate it to roughly 35 pounds of pressure. Cold start assist. So this does a couple different things. The first thing it's going to do is when the engine's off, it's going to close the turbo, which is why if you click here, it says commanded feedback 2%, 0 and 2. So the turbo's closed. Once the controller sees 75 RPMs, it releases it to my starting position. Once it releases to the starting position, it's going to back itself back down. Oops, wrong button. And it's going to regulate roughly 10 psi. If I give it gas, it's going to disengage, but if I go to 1300 RPMs, it's going to completely disable the feature until the next time I start my truck, unless you have the wet stack prevention enabled. What that's saying is, once you're idling again, you're below that 1300 RPMs, how long before it engages? For here, it's 1 minute. So I have a common 5.9 common rail. If you have more than a minute or two, it's going to throw a check engine light. And then this is my gauges. So now my truck's currently at 111 degrees. So let's see what happens. So you see the commanded feedback dropping down. My exhaust PSI is at 4, 5%, 6%, well 6 PSI, 7 PSI, 8 PSI, 9, and that's 10. So now the controller is going to regulate 10 psi because that's what I programmed it there. And it'll hold this until the exhaust brake kicks off. So if you have a common rail, it'll sit here in idle or potentially high idle if it's cold enough. Once you get to about 180 degrees, the 5.9 common rail will actually turn this function off. So I want to high idle it. So my engine RPM goes up, but as you can see that exhaust PSI, it followed it, but then the controller started adjusting it. And then I'm going to turn it off. And the same thing, now it's going to readjust. Now this is really good, especially if you're living in a colder state or if you're up in Canada. This helps warm up your engine. So ideally what you would want to do is have a remote start. You go into the truck, you flip the exhaust brake switch on, you turn your heaters on, your heat warmers, whatever you have in your truck. You turn it on the night prior, you wake up in the morning, you do the remote start, the truck starts up, and then the turbo's regulating to 10 pounds of exhaust pressure, everything's getting warm, so when you come out to the truck's a lot warmer, a lot faster. Alright, so now I'm gonna drive around real quick. Last video I made, I ran into a deer. So hopefully doesn't happen this time. I was trying to get out here a little earlier, but the sun's already going down. So I have my exhaust brake regulated to 35 pounds of pressure. So now the turbo is closing up, and as you can see, I got 35 pounds. Give it gas, turns off. Now I'm slowing down, pressing the brake. Engine's downshifting. Regulates. So the engine's still trying to get warm. So that's why you see the exhaust pressure closing up. Give it gas, gonna turn that function off. Still working on the tune. I have compounds on my truck, so I'm still trying to make it work the way I want it to work. And that's the exhaust brake. My truck's has their compounds on it, so I have their Turbonator 6271, I believe, is my high pressure, and I have their S475 is my low pressure. Definitely a lot funner to drive with this setup on it. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to comment, and if you have any questions specifically about the Turbonator, feel free to hit up Diesel Power Source. Thanks.